All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's still technically morning, so I can say that for a couple more minutes. I am Sarah Beth Ray. I am the director of Young Professional Connections and the Impact CB group of the Council Bluffs Chamber, which is a really great opportunity. I've been with the Chamber since November and just really connected with people in this group. And we're doing some great things. So if you're not yet a registered member of Impact CV and you'd like to be, please just reach out to me. It's a really easy process and totally free if you're a chamber member. So we'd love to have you. I do want to just allow everybody to introduce themselves in the chat. So just stick your name in there, maybe who you work for, and if you are on any Impact CB committees, that'd be great to know as well. And I do want to also thank our series sponsor for Impact CB, that is Iowa Western Community College. They allow us to put on great events like this, and we're so thankful to have them. I do want to go ahead and just jump in. We've got some great speakers lined up to talk today, and we're going to get started with Rosie Higgs. She is from the Nonprofit Association of the Midlands, and she's going to start us off on our topic of board service and what that really means. And we love to encourage the young professionals in our community to get involved, and board, committee, task force service is a great way to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Rosie. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. My name's Rosie. I am the Director of Programs at the Nonprofit Association of the Midlands. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen and then rearrange a little bit. Here we go. I have been at the Nonprofit Association of the Midlands for a little over 3 years. I am an alumni of Leadership Council Bluffs, and I meant to, before I logged on, go upstairs and look at my t-shirt to remember what class I'm in. I think I was in class 31, but I noticed that Katie's on the call and she was in class with me, so maybe she can confirm. But I'm super happy to be here to talk about board service. At the Nonprofit Association of the Midlands, we believe that board service is one of the most important ways folks can engage with their communities. Not everybody is going to work for a nonprofit, but everybody can serve on a board and support a nonprofit in that way, as well as volunteer for nonprofits and all that. But board service is such an important role. And so we want to make sure that people know how to serve on a board. We want to make sure that you know about best practices for board service so you can get the most out of your board service, as well as the organizations that you serve can benefit from your service as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We have plenty of time for questions, so please feel free to stop me if something I'm saying doesn't make sense, or if you have questions or it makes you think of questions or something like that. We've got plenty of time together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. A little bit, there's a few folks that work for or volunteer for member organizations, but for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Nonprofit Association of the Midlands, we are a nonprofit member organization that exists to serve nonprofits. So our role is really to help nonprofits beef up their infrastructure and extend their capacity so they can concentrate on their missions. We know that nobody gets into nonprofit work because people really love nonprofit finance, or people are super excited about HR and all that kind of stuff, but all of that stuff is really important to keep your doors open. So we help take some of that load off nonprofits so they can concentrate on their missions, which is really the exciting part, and that's why people join nonprofits. We are a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. The National Council is a kind of an umbrella organization. We are one of 37 like organizations spread across the country. We at NAM serve Nebraska, Southwest Iowa, as well as we serve some folks in Kansas, as well as South Dakota. We actually have members from across the country that benefit from some of our products and services, but our primary service area is Nebraska and Iowa. So just either using your reactions or the hands that are attached to your body or whatever works best for you, just kind of a show of hands. How many folks have served on a nonprofit board before? Or have maybe volunteered for a nonprofit? Have any of you donated to a nonprofit or given money or some in kind? Donated items, maybe you drop clothes off that you don't need anymore or something like that. How many people have used the services of a nonprofit? So fewer people usually say yes to that, because when you think of nonprofits, you might be thinking of like the Micah House Shelter or other nonprofits that serve people who are at some pretty rough times in their life. But actually, nonprofits are all across our community. Many of our arts organizations are nonprofits. Many of our hospitals and museums are nonprofits. So you may have used the services of a nonprofit or benefited from a nonprofit and not even known it. Most of us, when we think of nonprofits, we're thinking of the 501c3s. So things such as the Micah House Shelter, Children's Square, other organizations like that provide services, the food bank, things like that. That's what we think of. But also nonprofits are like things like our Kiwanis clubs. Many of our schools are nonprofits, although they're a different kind of nonprofit. Many of our advocacy organizations, like I'm thinking of Nebraska Appleseed or any of the other advocacy organizations, those are all nonprofit organizations. They may have a different designation. There's a 501c3, which is what we think of most normally, but there's also 501c4s, which are advocacy organizations that are able to do some lobbying with it, both at the state and federal level. As well as membership clubs. Even if you belong to a homeowners association or a neighborhood association, those are often nonprofits as well. So nonprofits are all across our communities. In Iowa, there are almost, and I'm sorry, this is 2016 data. They don't have updated data yet, but in 2016, there were almost 12,000 501c3 nonprofits in Iowa. There are a little over 11% of the workforce in Iowa works for a nonprofit. It is a myth that nonprofits are not a part of our tax base. Nonprofits they don't pay corporate income tax, but they pay all other taxes. So nonprofits are an important part of the Iowa economy as well. Iowans gave over $7 billion to nonprofits. I'd be interested to see what that number is like now, because we know that people tend to get, in times of crisis, people tend to get more charitable rather than less charitable. So I'm excited to see these updated numbers when they put out another study. So talking about board service, there are many benefits to board service. First of all, it's a way to give back and make a difference. It's one of the leading a nonprofit organization and supporting a nonprofit organization is a great way to make a difference in your community. You can bring experience, expertise, background that is not present within the organization. So for example, many smaller nonprofits don't have the benefit of an HR department or a finance department. But you, maybe having those skills yourself, can bring those skills to a nonprofit through your board service. So it's a really great way to extend the capacity of a nonprofit. But also for you as a person, it can help to extend your skills as well. So it helps you practice your teamwork, practice your problem solving, sharpen your analytical skills. It's a great way for you to meet other people. It's a wonderful networking opportunity for many folks. And it just expands your network and helps you build connections across your community. So that's one of the great reasons to become involved in board service. Of course, we hope that people will join boards because they're passionate about the organization. You're passionate about the issue that you seek to address through your board service, but it also has some personal benefits to you as well. So, sorry, that's the neighbor's taking out his garbage. Sorry about that. So there are some general expectations. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into that, but just first, I'd like to go over just some general expectations of board service. First of all, board service is a job. It has some very clear expectations attached to it. You are expected to attend board meetings, and you are expected usually to serve on a committee of some kind. There may be other expectations tied to board service, but just like you might approach a professional opportunity, when you are joining a board, if there are expectations that you don't think you can meet, you should speak up. There may be able to be accommodations, or it may be that that particular board opportunity is just not right for you. We want you to remember that your voice at your first board meeting is just as important as your voice at your last meeting. Being new, bringing new perspectives is valuable. You are asked to be on that board for a reason. Many times we see folks, especially if it's your first board, you may be quiet for your first several meetings. You may not feel empowered to give feedback or provide input or ask questions, but that's the opposite of what we hope you will do. Your advice as a new set of eyes around the table is really important to board service, and you were there for a reason. So they hope you'll share your expertise. The board is not an appendage to the organization. It's a common misconception that the board acts almost separately from the organization and maybe acts in just an advisory capacity. What is actually true is that the board, it leads the organization. The board is ultimately responsible for the success of the organization and is actually, as a body, provides the leadership to the organization in cooperation with the chief executive. So that's usually a chief executive officer or an executive director. Titles may vary. But the board is actually a very integral part of the organization and is in fact acts as a body as the leader of the organization. Fundraising is almost always, and with rare exceptions, the NAM board does not have a fundraising expectation, but almost every other board has a fundraising expectation. That does not mean you need to have rich friends that you can ask for money, although that certainly helps. Nobody's going to be mad if you do, but you don't need to know rich people to be a successful board member. You do need to become comfortable asking for money. And you may do that in a lot of different ways. Most boards will help give board members comfortable ways to do that. You may be asked to invite people to a fundraiser. You may be asked to help make connections for the fundraising staff for the organization, make introductions, sit in on meetings, stuff like that. You may not be sitting across from another person actually asking them to financially support the organization, but almost every board, with very rare exceptions, there is a fundraising expectation, and your passion for the organization needs to outweigh your fear of asking for money. No, that's not true. Some people do enjoy asking for money. They see it as sales. They see it exciting. I'm definitely not one of those people, but there are people that like it. Most people don't like it though. So, but your love for the organization and your passion for the mission needs to outweigh any fear that you might feel. A board seat is a position of relative power. You do have a say in how the organization runs. Your decisions impact the outcomes of the organization and therefore impact people served. So it is important to remember that as a board member, you have some power. So keeping that in mind and using the mission of the organization and the overall health and good of the organization as a guidepost when making decisions is very, very important. And finally, most boards expect some level of financial support as a condition of board service. So it is rare now for boards to expect a financial contribution of a certain amount, although there are some that do prescribe a certain amount for board service. Most boards just expect you to make a personally meaningful contribution. So, for example, I serve on the ACLU of Nebraska board. I am expected to make a gift of at least $5 a year. Most people give more than that, but some level of financial contribution to the organization is usually expected. I bring this up because if you're recruited to serve on a board, you're going to want to ask about that because it will be very awkward to be sitting at, say, your third board meeting and find out that you were supposed to be giving $1,000 a year and that's not something that's in your means, which has happened. That's a real story. So asking about an expected financial contribution is a good way to avoid that awkwardness. There are 3 levels of board engagement: the fiduciary level, the strategic level, and the visionary level. The fiduciary level is the level at which you attend to the fiscal health of the organization. This is a primary responsibility of all board members, and if you do nothing else as a part of your board service, you should be attending to the fiscal health of the organization. This means that you look at the finances regularly, usually monthly. But although not always, if your board meets once a quarter, then you're often looking maybe at them once a quarter, but you are regularly looking at the finances of the organization and you understand them. You are able to roughly look at the profit and loss, for example, and understand what that says. You are roughly able to follow money in and money out, and you understand how money is spent. The fiduciary responsibility also attends to potential risks for the organization. Do you serve vulnerable people? Do you have the appropriate insurance you need? Are your facilities safe? Do you have the appropriate protections for staff and volunteers? Does your board offer directors and officers insurance? And if not, why not? And how can we get it? Attending to that fiscal responsibility for the board is the most basic level of responsibility of a board, and the failure at this level can cause lasting, real harm to the organization. Failure at the other levels also cause harm, but the failure at the fiscal level can get an organization shut down, or at best get you in the paper, and you don't want to be in the paper. So make sure that you're attending, you understand the finances, and if any sort of mismanagement is found, you know how to talk about that and ask questions. The strategic level of engagement at the board involves strategic planning. Do you have an action plan for the next 1 to 3 years? Do you know how you are going to meet the goals of the organization? Is the chief executive, CEO or ED, evaluated based on the strategic plan of the organization? Is the leadership of the organization driving it forward? Are you meeting the goals that you have? Then finally, the visionary level. This is kind of the dreaming. What kind of a world do we want to create, and what is our organization's role in creating that world? This is obviously not necessarily something that you're going to talk about at every board meeting, but just knowing and being familiar with and being able to articulate the ultimate goal of the organization, the ultimate reason the organization exists, is an important role of the board, because you're going to use that as a guidepost when making decisions. There are 3 primary responsibilities of board members. We say all roads lead to these 3 primary responsibilities. First of all, the duty of care, which means that you are using the reasonable person standard when you make decisions for the organization. You're being a good steward of the organization. You understand what your responsibilities are as a board member, and you are bringing your A game to every board meeting. The duty of loyalty, which means that you will make all decisions in the best interest of the organization. This also means you avoid conflicts of interest. We'll talk about conflicts of interest here in a little bit, but you avoid conflicts of interest at all costs, meaning you will not benefit as a individual as a result of a board decision. And then finally, the duty of obedience. This means that you know what the mission of the organization is, you know what are in the bylaws of the organization, you are familiar with any rules, regulations, ordinances, laws, anything like that that apply to the organization, and you attend to those and ensure that there are never any violations of those things. So the best board members, let's see where we're at. The best board members are ones that ask tough questions. A culture of question asking around the board table is so important, and unfortunately it's relatively rare. So a board that sees questions as something that are welcomed and a way to share more information or get more information, as opposed to something that's challenging, are really the best boards. Board members are strong stewards for the organization, meaning that you are sharing the message of the organization. You are always presenting the organization in a good light. You are attending to the financial health of the organization and ensuring that it has enough resources. You govern as a body rather than individuals. The board acts as a body. The board as a body oversees the chief executive of the organization. The chief executive then oversees the staff of the organization. That's a very clear line and a pretty important one. Board members do their homework. You're prepared for board meetings. You understand the agenda for the board and you're ready to engage in it. You've reviewed your board materials prior to the meeting, all that kind of stuff. You do the homework that you need to be prepared for a board meeting. You have adequate time to give to the organization. It's not something that you squish in among 50 other things. You have the adequate time to give the organization the time it needs. Different boards require different time commitments. So knowing what that is before you say yes to a board seat will help you do that. You're prepared for and you attend every meeting. If you can't attend a meeting, you're letting somebody know. Most boards have some sort of attendance requirement, so knowing what that is going to be important. You're supporting the organization, staff, and programs. That might mean financially, that might mean by making connections, that might mean by attending fundraisers and inviting other people, all that kind of stuff. you drive the scenario planning. So during like 2020, boards were really, really vital to organizations in helping them continue to keep their feet under them, continue to move forward, and just kind of keep their heads about them. So driving the scenario planning, supporting them during tough times, really important. And you're a passionate advocate for the organization as well as the issue that you serve. So first of all, before I move into some questions that you might ask as a board member, are there any questions? I haven't paused for questions yet, and I've been kind of throwing softballs of information at you. Does anybody have any questions? All right, I'm going to keep doing that, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So things that the board should consider, some kind of key questions that are generally asked around board tables. Obviously, this isn't verbatim, but some key points of discussion that are usually discussed around a board table. Bottom line is the internal functions that we have, is the capacity that we have, the finances that we have adequate relative to what we want to accomplish? And if not, what are we going to do to fix that? Do we have enough staff? Is our budget adequate? Do we need to hire maybe consultants? Is there expertise we need to have on staff to reach our goals that we don't have right now? Is there expertise around the board table that we don't have that we should in order to reach our goals? Do we have enough volunteers? Are our volunteers supported? Essentially, do we have the resources to do what we need to do? Are we aware of any potential risks to the organization? We talked a little bit about that when we were talking about the levels of board service, but what are the risks to the organization, and have we taken steps to mitigate those? Serving vulnerable people is a very common risk. If you serve children or vulnerable adults, making sure that you have that your facilities are safe, that you have adequate background checks, that you have the adequate insurance that you need to protect folks. All that kind of stuff. That is a key board function to make sure that it's there. Do we have the financial protections in place? Are we following our internal controls? Do we have tools? Do we do an annual audit? Do we have outside eyes on our finances? Are our programs and services aligned with our mission and vision? Now, this may seem like a strange question because yes, of course it is. Why would you be doing it if it's not aligned with your mission and vision? But unfortunately, sometimes what happens, particularly in times of when there's not enough money in an organization, you may see organizations start to apply for grants that are kind of in line with their mission, but not quite. It's a thing called mission creep. And so sometimes organizations in search of money, which is legit, nobody has enough, right? But sometimes you'll see organizations say, well, you know, this grant kind of funds what we do. It's not quite, but we can make some small tweaks to our programming to qualify. An organization doing that once, it's usually fine. An organization that keeps doing that, it falls victim to what we call mission creep. And that means that happens when sometimes programs of the organization don't actually apply to the mission of the organization. It may seem like not a big deal, but actually it's your mission is a part of your 990, which is, we'll talk about in a little bit, which is a legal document. And a key part of transparency for your organization. And if the work of the organization is not, sorry, my cat, if the work of the organization is not in line with the mission, that actually is something that an organization can be held legally responsible for. So it's the board's role is to attend to that. What is the status of our strategic plan? Does anybody know what it is? Are we moving it forward? Is our executive director evaluated in relation to their progress on the strategic plan? Do we have committees that are doing work on the strategic plan? And relative to the work that we're doing, how much are we doing? Do we have access to numbers served? How much work is happening at the organization? How well are we doing it? Are we meeting our goals? Are people benefiting from our work? Who is benefiting from our work, and how are we doing that? The board should have access to any sort of evaluation data, customer satisfaction data, whatever data that the organization collects to show that they're doing what they set out to do. It should be something that's reviewed by the board fairly regularly. So this is all great, Rose, but I haven't even found a board. What I really want to know is how to find a board that I can serve on. So there's a few ways to do that. First of all, know what you're interested in. absolutely, it may seem like a good idea to just find a board, any board, and ask to join the board or apply to serve on the board. That, I mean, and if that's a decision we're going to make, you certainly can, and that will be fine. But I will say that sometimes the work of the board can get really tedious. Reviewing financials, attending to issues that come up within the organization, supporting the executive director and moving things forward that you may or may not be interested in, that can get really boring and tedious and hard if you don't care about the mission of the organization. So all of that is easier if you like if you identify with the issue that you're trying to solve, thing you're trying to move forward, or organization that you're serving. So I highly recommend you tie your board service to something that you're really truly passionate about and interested in. So finding an organization that matches your interests and passions, there's a few different ways to do that. Googling is a great way. There are a lot of national organizations that actually have national boards. So that's a way to find an organization that is not necessarily close to you geographically. NAM offers a tool called the Community Compass. Every nonprofit organization in Nebraska and Iowa is listed in the Community Compass. You can find information on their financials, other board members, their programs and services, all that kind of stuff. I've put the URL here. It's kind of long and clunky. If you just Google NAM Community Compass, it will come up. The United Way is a nice way to find organizations, as well as Share Omaha. I see Katie's on the call. Share Omaha is a great way to find organizations that are looking for volunteers. Volunteering is a great way to build relationships within an organization. There are many boards that really, they do kind of what I call a snowball search for new board members. They will have current board members bring forth nominations of people that they know. And so getting to know current board members is a nice way to be considered for board service. But more and more boards are actually doing more open calls for applications for board members. That's how I got my seat on the ACLU of Nebraska board, is they put it in their newsletter publication, their e-newsletter, as well as on social media, that they were looking for new board members. I filled out an application and sent in my resume, and then I was called in for an interview and chosen for board service. More and more boards are doing that. It helps them attend to board diversity. We tend to know people who are like us. So when you're simply using current board members to find new board members, that can impact your board diversity that you have access to. So it's more and more common for boards to just do open calls for board members, and you can apply that way. So that's a great way to find boards. So newsletters, social media, and building relationships with current board members are a great way to do that. Most organizations make their board lists public, so you can often find them on their websites. If you can't, it'll be on their 990, although that is outdated, but you can find a board's 990 on GuideStar. Also on the IRS website will be their board list. Does somebody have a question? Okay, I'll check the chat when I'm done here. If you are invited to serve on a board, there are some pretty important questions to ask. First of all, do you have time? So that's going to require a conversation. You need to know what a board requires of you. For example, I'm on the ACLU board. I'm expected to attend a board meeting every month, and then there is a committee that I serve on that meets once a quarter. So I know I will have those meetings, as well as a little bit of work in between, but it's pretty minimal compared to a previous board I served on. I used to serve on the Maha Festival board, which was very much a working board, and we were writing policies and planning the festival and doing a lot of the day-to-day work, which was a much heavier lift in terms of time. So having a frank conversation about how much time you have, as well as how much time the board is going to ask of you, is an important decision point. Knowing what's expected of you. Are you expected to serve on a committee? Are you going to be asked to write policy, etc.? Always ask, why me? So we talked a little bit earlier about how nonprofit organizations, particularly very small ones, do not have the benefit of HR departments, finance departments, legal departments, whereas many larger organizations do. So if you are asked to serve on a board and they are expecting you to fulfill HR functions for the organization or advise on that, it's good to know that in advance. If you work in HR full time, because you may or may not want to do that. You may say, you know what, I do HR 50 hours a week. I don't really want to do that in my off time either. Or particularly if you have some legal expertise and they're asking you to serve on the board for your legal expertise, knowing where you legally can advise and can't advise and being honest about that is really important. So that why me question is going to help you, it's going to save you some awkward conversations later. Who else sometimes, and it may or may not matter to you, but sometimes folks want to know who else is on the board. What kind of connections are you going to be able to make? That's a legit question and absolutely one you should ask if that's not shared with you right away. And then knowing what information you should have access to make your decision. And you may or may not care, but we recommend that folks take a look at the bylaws, because that's where your board responsibilities should be spelled out. So if they leave something out while you're having the recruitment conversation, it'll be in the bylaws. And boards, whether or not they follow their bylaws, they should be. So knowing what's in those bylaws before you say yes is pretty important. You won't have access to detailed finances, but some sort of picture of the financial health of the organization is a good thing to look at before saying yes. If the organization is in financial trouble, that is not necessarily a reason to not join a board, but it's information that you might want to have prior to making a decision. If you knowing where they're at in their strategic plan and what their plans are for the short-term future, that can be either exciting or not exciting to you based on where it's at. And then most boards, great boards will provide you with some sort of a job description or a committee member description or something like that very clearly outlines what's expected of you. So seeing that, it's legit to ask to see that prior to saying yes to joining a board. So yay, you've found a board, you've asked all the right questions. Now you're getting ready for your first board meeting. What are some things you might want to think about? You should have, and you deserve, a good board orientation that is a deep dive into the finances of the organization. It gives you an opportunity to really become familiar with the mission and vision of the organization, the programs and services, the work that they do, how much they do. You should get a deep dive into the strategic plan. You should see job descriptions of board members, as well as, if you're going to interact with them, some key staff members. It's not uncommon to see an ED's board description and maybe a chief financial officer or a development staff or something like that. That's not uncommon. You should see descriptions of your committee, the committee that you're serving on, as well as have a chance to meet other board members. I highly recommend, even just informally, finding a board buddy. They may or may not know that they're your board buddy, but identifying a person who is a safe person to ask questions of, particularly if there's something that happens at a meeting that you don't necessarily understand. You might not feel comfortable saying that around the full board table, although I encourage you to, because if it's confusing to you, it's probably confusing to somebody else. But if you're not comfortable with that, identifying a buddy who you can ask some questions of either before or after the meeting is a nice way to help you become more comfortable. And then finally, make sure you ask questions. Everybody around that table had a first board meeting too. So remembering that, and they asked you to be there for a reason. You have something that they want. So remembering that and asking questions so you can fulfill your duties as a board member is important. And asking questions is an important part of that. So just a few questions that most people have about board service that they might think that are very dumb and very basic, but they're actually really good questions. I'm going to go ahead and throw these out right now. And then it looks like we've got like 10 minutes left. So we've got time for other questions that you might have. First of all, what's a 990? The 990 is a nonprofit's tax form. Every nonprofit has to file a 990. There was a time when very small nonprofits, I believe the threshold was $50,000 revenue or less, didn't have to file a 990. That's not the case anymore. Every nonprofit needs to file a 990. The board should review that 990 prior to its filing and understand the 990. and have a chance to approve it prior to its filing. It is a board responsibility not to fill out the 990, but to ensure that the 990 is filed. The 990 is a public-facing document. So any member of the public can ask to see your 990. They can download it from online. If they show up at your facility and ask to see it, you have to show it to them. So a primary board responsibility is reviewing that 990, making sure it's accurate. What is a consent agenda? A consent agenda is, it's not used by every board, but it's used by many boards. It is a gift, a time-saving gift from God. I love the consent agenda. The consent agenda is used for things that require approval. They need to be entered into the official board record, but they don't require discussion. So things like minutes from previous board meetings, oftentimes like a program report or executive direct report, something that can be read, digested, and then just approved to be entered in the official record, belongs in a consent agenda. We have a whole packet of stuff that helps guide you in building a consent agenda if that's something that you are not using now and you would like to learn more about. What are Robert's rules? Don't worry too much about Robert's rules because nobody does them right. So all you need to know about Robert's rules is that they are a way to mark decisions and show consensus. So most boards will use them to the extent of, okay, so here is the, I move to increase or approve spending of $50,000 on X thing. Who is going to approve that decision? And then maybe Joni might say, I approve. So Joni enters it into the record. Ken will second the motion. And then everybody will say all approved. And people who agree with that decision will say aye. And people who don't agree with that decision will say nay. And then that's a key for discussion. Rarely anybody says nay. I wish more people would say nay, but that's usually key that you haven't had discussion yet. You can also abstain from decisions if it's something that you have a conflict of interest with, but nobody does them right. So there are books and books and books on Robert's rules. Don't let it stress you out or intimidate you. It's really just a way to mark decisions and show who approved and who did not. What is a working board versus a governing board? This is a very common question. A working board is usually a board that is affiliated with a newer organization or a smaller organization. Those boards are often engaged in writing policies, maybe doing some of the day-to-day work of the organization, like fundraising. They might be doing some of the finances, but you're engaging in the actual operations of the organization. Whereas a governing board is ultimately where we hope all boards will go eventually, because the governing board is the board that is concentrating on this long-term sustainability of the organization. So they are doing some very high-level decision-making, driving the strategic planning forward, and attending to the very high level financial health of the organization. So we hope boards will move from a working board to a governing board. But again, if you're a very small organization, you don't have a ton of staff or sometimes even no staff, you're an entirely volunteer run organization, you're going to stick with that working board model. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's keeping you from that long-term sustainability work. Finally, what's a conflict of interest? A conflict of interest, every board should have a conflict of interest statement. Every board member should affirm this conflict of interest statement and disclose any potential conflicts once a year. Board members cannot benefit financially from a decision made at the board level. Now, that sounds pretty black and white. It's actually a little bit gray. So for example, say you are serving on an organization that exists in a very small town. There is one catering company in town. You are affiliated with that catering company. So the board decides to use that catering company for your event. You are technically benefiting financially, but because they're the only catering company in town, maybe they give you a price break, something like that. It is not a conflict of interest. So the key to mitigating conflicts of interest is to discuss them, make sure that the decision is in the best interests of the organization, and you document all of that in the official record of the board meeting. So, and we have tons and tons of information about conflicts of interest as well that we can share with you. That's a pretty common phone call that I get, is people making that decision about whether or not something is a conflict. I'm always happy to talk those things through with you. So my email address is here on the screen. Please feel free to take a note of it. I'm always happy to answer questions or talk through sticky situations or whatever. That's a big part of my job. So I'm happy to do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. What questions do folks have that I can answer? Okay.
Rosie, I'll ask a question just for
Okay.
this group. Can you talk a little bit about how important diversity on boards is, just in general, but also diversity in age, because we have a lot of young professionals on the call who may not have board experience yet. So what can they bring to the table that maybe a more experienced board member doesn't?
That's a great question. Thank you. So diversity on board, around board tables is something that's getting more and more attention. It should have been getting attention the entire time. We know that diversity makes for better decisions. There's tons and tons of research and data that tells us that diversity around decision-making tables is very, very important. Now, beyond that, as a young person, perspectives that you can bring, you have a different view of the world. You probably were in school more recently than other folks around the board, so you have access maybe to more latest information based on the cause that you're serving. And just not having served on a board before, knowing how to ask questions, and the questions that you're going to bring are going to be different, again, from folks who, like you said, have a little bit more experience. So that's so very important. And so we hope you'll bring that. People are looking for younger board members. Many boards are looking for younger board members and are looking for more diversity around their board table. We believe that that boards should reflect the communities that they're serving. So, and how you think of community might be the actual physical community that the organization sits in. You might think of community as the people you serve. There's lots of different ways you can think of community, but diversity around board tables is important. GuideStar now tracks board diversity. They didn't before. I think they started 2 years ago tracking board diversity. It's something that more and more funders are paying attention to. So board diversity is very important. I'm glad you brought that question up, Sarah Beth. Mia asked in the chat, if someone is asked to become a board member, is there research that you would recommend? Oh, thank you, Joni. Is there research you would recommend doing before committing? And what are some red flags to look for? Yeah, I would absolutely. And the example you put was reviewing a nonprofit's 990. Yes, absolutely. Reviewing the 990. If they do an audit, that should be publicly available. So reviewing that, knowing though that audits, financial reviews, those kinds of things are snapshots. A clean audit does not necessarily mean that there is an absence of fraud, but it's a good thing to look at. And it's going to be tougher to get access to financial documents that are going to show financial mismanagement that are publicly available, because usually you're able to hide those things in the publicly available documents. But so I would recommend asking questions and asking if they do an audit, asking what kind of eyes are on their finances and how they help board members attend to that financial or fiscal responsibility. So asking lots of questions. There is in an organization's 990, there is a listing of the top 3 highest paid employees. I like to look at that, and now it's old. It'll probably be 2 years old, the 990 that you're able to find. I like to look at it in relation to the salary that they've offered me. Now that's also going to be different, based on where you fall in the organization. But if I have attained a leadership position and the CEO's salary is, exponentially higher than mine, that's just something to attend to. It could be that CEO has been there for 5,000 years. And so that is absolutely warranted, but it's just information to have. So that's a great question, Mia. I don't know if I've answered it, but let me know if I haven't. A friend is thinking of starting a nonprofit and invited me to serve on a board. Should I? Okay, that's a fantastic question, Katie. Maybe you should, and maybe you shouldn't. Know that starting a nonprofit is a heavy, heavy, heavy lift. That there is a lot that goes into it. And so it is not going to be a quick process. It is not going to be an easy process. And so there will be a lot asked of you. So if you've got a lot of time, and if this friend is a great friend and you have a deep passion for the cause that they are serving, and you have a lot of energy to give to starting this organization, Yes, absolutely. Why not? But know that's a big lift and a heavy lift. So uh, keeping that in mind, just knowing that it's possible that you're biting off more than you can chew in that situation. It's a big deal to start a nonprofit. It is, fun fact, the longest form that the IRS has is the form to start a 501c3. So it's just the paperwork is overwhelming. Other questions? Oh, thank you, Justin. I see the Board of Supervisors, that list of, that's fantastic. Thank you. Awesome.
All right, looks like we have one more question from Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. What is your advice if you work for a nonprofit organization and fundraising for another board is a conflict of interest? That's common for us nonprofit nerds. That's something that comes up a lot. There are some organizations that just simply don't allow it. Like you just can't. The last organization I worked for, I just simply couldn't fundraise for another organization. So when I was asked to serve on a board, I had to disclose that. It gets tricky. It is hard because you're wearing a lot of different hats. Because there's nobody that works for a nonprofit that does not have a role in fundraising in some way, whether or not that's your official role. So it is very tough. So what I usually do when asked to serve on a board is just be honest about that. I can make introductions. I can sit in on meetings. I can help write fundraising appeals if that is useful, but I cannot, as an employee of X nonprofit, sit down wearing a hat of Y nonprofit and make a direct ask for fundraising. I just can't. It's usually cleanest, and it gets squishy and messy. But knowing that there are some folks that they've been like, well, thanks, but no thanks. Then we need fundraisers on our board. So I tell them what I can do, and I'm honest about what I can't. That's a great question, and that's common. Okay, I have gone a minute over my time, I'm seeing. So you have my email address. We're on check out our website if you don't have it, but I'm always happy to talk through any of these situations or answer any questions. Always happy to help.
Rosie, thank you so much for all of that knowledge and your experience with it. I know it's very helpful for everybody in this room. We're going to transition now a little bit to take that knowledge and see what the real life applications of that can be. We have representatives both from the city and the county here to talk a little bit about what boards, commissions, task forces there are available and how you can access those. So I'll go first to the mayor. I know he's doing double duty on a different meeting, so I hope he can hear us right now. Mayor Walsh, are you here? Maybe not. Okay, well, we'll go over to Justin Schultz then. He's our representative for Pottawatomie County. And Justin, if you could just share a little bit about yourself first, and then what kind of boards are available, how you apply to those boards, and maybe some things they've done in the past that we would recognize out in the community.
Sure. Well, my name is Justin Schultz. I'm, a Council Bluffs native, I guess. I've been on the county board for about 6 years. Got elected first in the 2014 election, and then, been serving ever since. It's been a great ride so far. When it comes to, boards and commissions and things like that, I think, our last speaker gave a really good, touched on some really high points, but one thing I want to bring up and just kind of to support some of what she presented was that, when you're asked to serve on boards, it is perfectly fine to say no. When you really evaluate yourself and think about what you got going on in your life, and you ask yourself, can I serve on this? Do I have time for this? The other question you ask, are you going to be effective at doing it either? There may be some other folks that have more time that can dedicate to it that will be more effective than you, and just really weigh those options in your head. I've had that happen in my life, where I've got on different boards, commissions, and realized that I really don't have time for this, and I had to step down on a couple of them even this year. So the reality is, real life happens. You have jobs, you have kids, you have school, whatever it comes up in your life. So just make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into, and then obviously be honest with yourself if you want to continue to serve on that. So I'll give you an example. For me, it was Raise Me to Read, a great organization. It's just, I just simply never had the time to get to the meetings and attend. So I stepped down this year. So anyway, it doesn't hurt you if you do that. I mean, being honest is a good thing. When you think about, Potawatomi County and some of the boards, commissions that we offer, I sent you that list over in your chat. What I would urge people to do is go to potcounty-ia.gov. You can Google Potawatomi County and find the same website. We've recently revamped our webpage so that you can kind of navigate a little easier and find things. But on the boards and commissions page, it's got the whole list there, and then at the bottom there's an application process you go through, and we ask a series of questions, and we want to make sure that we're not putting on felons or people that may try to do things that aren't good. So we probably are a little more in depth, I think, than probably some, but we really want to make sure. And to be honest, we have Potawatomi County, the sheriff's office right there with us, so we run names through there too, just to make sure that we've got good people on. But again, yeah, go to that boards and commissions page and you can see those. Terms for all these boards, commissions they vary so much. There's some that are 1 year, there's some that are 2 years, there's some that are 3 years. There's some that are just hybrid of both. For example, the Veteran Affairs Commission, that is a commission that, you can, some of them are on there for 2 years, some are on for 3. That way you have a little bit of continuity between the commissioners. And, there's obviously requirements on some of these that you have to, like, for example, Veteran Affairs, you got to be a veteran in order to serve on that one. That doesn't say you can't come to meetings and can't help, but some of them have certain requirements that you got to meet before you can get on there. And, that these are great things to be a part of. They're not just resume builders. I mean, a lot of times you'll be able to get on something and actually serve your community and feel like you're doing something meaningful. You don't have to be an elected official in order to serve your community. And that's why, when I tell people that are considering a run for office, I say, go serve on boards, go serve on commissions, get involved with some of the subcommittees that are out there, get that involvement before you come here, because you're going to realize all the things that you got to deal with and know, and how to collect all those, basically funnel that information into what you do when you once get elected. So, that last one was a tough act to follow. So I really think it'd be best if I just allow folks to kind of ask some questions, and, I can kind of help hopefully answer them or steer you to someone that can better than me. So does anyone have any? I know there's a lot of folks on here that I recognize, some I don't. Crickets. So
that's no problem. Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing that information with us and for putting that information in the chat as well. I see now that we also have the mayor on. Can you hear us, Mayor Walsh?
I certainly can. Good.
Awesome. Welcome. Do you want to take a moment just to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what opportunities there are on a city level for board involvement?
For those that don't know me, and in the middle of a Rotary meeting, which is on public safety, and so I'm multitasking, so I apologize if the picture isn't very good. My name is Matt Walsh, Mayor of Council Bluffs in my 8th year, 18 years on the city council before that. And Sarah Beth asked me to talk a little bit about boards and commissions in the city of Council Bluffs. And we actually have 16 different board or commissions, and they run a gamut of a variety of different responsibilities, because the city has multiple responsibilities. So I'll just go down the list. The Board of Appeals was created to determine the suitability of alternate building materials. And so if you're a contractor and know about construction, the Board of Appeals looks for people with that skill set. The Library Board of Trustees, they serve a 6-year term. They must be a resident of Council Bluffs. They help make policy for the library board, and they're responsible for the librarian's budget. They appoint the head librarian, and they meet the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Waterworks Board of Trustees oversees the Council Bluffs Waterworks. That's a separate entity from the city of Council Bluffs, but The way it's structured is that the city appoints the trustees, and then the trustees oversee the business dealings of the board of the waterworks. Police Advisory Board must be a resident of Council Bluffs, a 6-year term. This board represents the community in ongoing review of major police policy decisions. The board provides direct citizen involvement into the management of our police department. The Planning Commission is a 5-year term, must again be a resident of Council Bluffs. And the Planning Commission advises the City Council on matters of zoning, subdivision development, comprehensive planning for the city. And meetings are held on the second Tuesday of each month at the Council Bluffs Library. Civil Rights Commission is a 3-year term, must be a resident of Council Bluffs. The Civil Rights Commission exists to protect the civil rights of all persons of Council Bluffs. The commission receives and investigates complaints of discrimination in areas of employment, housing, public accommodation, education, and credit. The commission is dedicated to safeguarding the civil rights of all through education to prevent and eliminate discrimination on the following basis: age, color, creed, familial status, gender identity, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race, religion, retaliation, sex or sexual orientation. The Civil Service Commission, while it sounds like the Civil Rights Commission, it is a different commission which deals with employees of the city of Council Bluffs, and it gives the employees an avenue to get a review on rulings in regards to their employment status. So the Civil Service Commission has jurisdiction to hear and determine matters involving the civil service employees under Chapter 400 of the Iowa Code. If somebody were to get fired and thought it was wrongfully so, they can appeal to the Civil Service Commission, and they would review their firing and make a ruling. The Community Development Advisory Committee advises the City Council with respect to community development block grants and home investment partnerships. These are federal programs with the money coming in to our community, and the committee gives their input on housing and public improvement needs in the community and formulates recommendation for City Council review. If you're interested in the airport, the Council Bluffs Airport Authority is a 4-year term, must be a resident of Potawatomi County, not necessarily the city of Council Bluffs. And the Council Bluffs Airport Authority has the power to acquire, hold, construct, improve, maintain, operate, own, and lease aviation facilities, to acquire, purchase, hold, own, operate, and lease any franchise property, real or personal, and mixed, just pretty much the business affairs of the Council Bluffs Airport. And if you have an interest in aviation, that would be a board that should spark your interest. The Council Bluffs Arena and Convention Commission oversees the Mid-America Center's operations, the established policy and long-term goals of the Arena and Convention Center. They develop, negotiate, and oversee the operations and the management of the arena. The Dodge Board, if you're interested in the Dodge House, Dodge Trust, Board of Trustees. Grenville Dodge left a financial stipend that to this day still kicks out almost $100,000 a year in grants that get distributed primarily for basic human services needs for the people of Council Bluffs. If you're interested in the history of Council Bluffs, the Historic Preservation Commission is a 3-year term. Again, must be a resident of Council Bluffs. They give consideration to expertise in historical architectural styles, engineering, preservation law, real estate, building restoration, architecture, and to try and keep those historic buildings designed in a historic fashion. The Municipal Housing Agency oversees the operations of Section 8 programs, Regal Towers, and there's Avenue B. Sorry, it slipped my mind what the name of that program is, but municipal housing's main responsibility is the construction, maintenance, and management of low rent housing for the elderly, handicap, and low to moderate income families. They help prepare applications for federal funds for people that are in need of housing. A popular one is the Parks and Recreation Commission. That's a 3-year term, must be a resident of Council Bluffs. They advise the city council with respect to the control of parks, recreation, and public property within the city, and they also provide for the promotion of recreation and cultural affairs in the city. Stormwater Advisory Committee, as we build out the city of Council Bluffs, every time you put an impervious surface on land where it didn't exist prior to, by impervious surfaces, a rooftop or a parking lot, that creates more water that runs off into the sewer system. And so this committee exercises powers and duties for stormwater management program. They provide a forum for public input on stormwater quality and related issues. And then finally, the Zoning Board of Adjustment is a 5-year term, must be a Council Bluffs resident. The Zoning Board of Adjustment hears requests for conditional use permits, requests for variances from the zoning ordinance, and the board conducts hearings on appeals of administrative interpretations pertaining to the zoning ordinance. And so the city has a broad zoning ordinance, and often that is very difficult to comply with. And so as a city council, you can't say, well, this applies to that person, but it doesn't apply to my friend. And so the avenue of appeal after the city council has made a ruling is to that Zoning Board of Adjustment. So they have ultimate authority to overrule the council in their decisions, and it gives citizens a right to due process. So those are the 16 boards. Varied. How do you get on a board? Just send your name to my office, your area of interest. We may not currently have an opening in your area of interest, but as you can imagine, these boards turn over on a fairly regular basis. And so usually within 6 months or so, if you're interested in a board, we can get you on that board. Some people are there for 20 years, and some people get on the boards and move on to something else. And so we always have openings. And I'd answer questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and apologize to Rotary for us for stealing you away for a few minutes for this presentation. Are there any questions? All right, if not, we'll go to our next speaker, who is Joni Poor. I know her because she is on our Chamber Board of Directors, and she's on our executive committee for that. So one thing that nobody's mentioned yet is that if you're on a board, people like me are going to reach out to you for opportunities like this to talk to groups. And so I'm very thankful, Joni, that you're here with us today to talk about your experience serving on boards, both the Chamber and other, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah Beth. I appreciate it. And thanks to Justin and Matt, and I think Rosie maybe had to duck off ahead of me. There's been some really, really good information. If you haven't served on a board, if you are interested, this is by far some really, really helpful information to help you make that decision. And if you do serve, to help you know what your role is and assess your involvement at that board level. So I'm Joni Poor. I'm on the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce board. I've been on the board since 2017. The Chamber board is, I think, the 7th or 8th board that I've served on in my professional career since 2004, when I started board service. My very first board service was with the Metro Area Continuum of Care for the Homeless. And it was when that organization was actually starting as a nonprofit organization. They were a loose association prior to becoming a full-fledged 501c3. And not only was that my first board involvement, but I served as their first board chair for 5 years. So I was able to jump right in and get lots and lots of experience really quickly at the board level. Earlier when Rosie was talking about some of the benefits to that, first of all, it was something that I was very, very passionate about. So giving my time was something that certainly was important to me to do, but also that very first board involvement had positive ramifications for me that continue today. For example, Matt Walsh is an individual that we recruited to serve on the board for his financial expertise. So that's how I met Matt when he was still on city council. And then obviously he's now moved on to mayor. I still pick up the phone to this day and call him, or he picks up the phone and calls me should there be anything in his wheelhouse or in mine that we need help with. So having that professional relationship at that board level really has helped beyond that as well. In addition to that, I'm currently the CEO at the Omaha Housing Authority. One of the commissioners here at the Housing Authority, when I was hired on 2 years ago, was also a board member with me on that initial board that I served on. So I can't underscore how important those relationships and developing those professionally can be. It's not a resume filler. The fact that it was very much a working board, the fact that it was a new organization, there were complicated processes, government funding that we had to do. I was able to prove myself. I was able to show that I was a competent leader and build those relationships, and then those things lasted on. Also, personally, Justin and I have kind of ran in similar circles through Council Bluffs, but through my involvement on the chamber board and Justin's involvement as an ad hoc or an ex officio member, that's how we met more formally. And I had a personal issue. I said, hey, I live out in the county. I have an issue. Who do I deal with for this? So not only professionally, but personally, there can be situations where you build really important relationships where you can stay connected. So I would say all of the things that Rosie mentioned about the importance of board service, plus all of those things that I just went over, really factor into those decisions that you make and can last for a really long time in ways you certainly can't see when those things are happening. I wouldn't have guessed that, you know, the board relationships I made in 2004 would be impacting me here today. So a couple of other things. I just wanted to hit on the conflict of interest provision as well. That can be really kind of hairy and make people kind of tend to either, for whatever reason, I tend to see people ignore the conflict of interest or kind of go far too overboard with it, when really it just needs to be a conversation. If you have a conflict or there could be a perceived conflict, just having that conversation. Hey, I don't know if there's a conflict here. What do you guys think? Let's have a conversation and let's hash it out. And it doesn't have to be a divisive issue, but unfortunately, sometimes it turns into one. So I would just say to always kind of be aware of that. It's not a problem to abstain on a vote half the time, 90% of the time, 99% of the time. You don't need that vote anyway to pass whatever's going on. So when you think about those conflict of interest issues, just make sure that you're just bringing those to the forefront and not being concerned about that, because I'd rather say, hey, I abstain, than find out later that there was in fact a true conflict that existed. I think that Rosie really covered the vast majority of just really good, solid foundational information related to board service. One thing I did want to share, because I'm a visual person, for anybody else who's on that's visual. Is it okay if I share my screen real quick? Okay, cool, thank you. I see you nodding, so I'm gonna go with yes. So, let me know if you guys are not seeing the Potawatomi County Board of Supervisors website. I'm not hearing anybody say anything different. So I'm super visual, as Justin was talking about. You go to Potawatomi's county's website, you click on Board of Supervisors, you click on boards and commissions, and you get the whole list and the application. So I think that's super slick and easy to get to. All of the ones that Matt went through. Did my page change, or are you still okay? Yes, thank you. Sometimes I love Zoom and it doesn't do what I want it to do. On the Council Bluffs city website, go to government, go to boards and commissions. And again, you get that full list that Matt listed. And you also can click on any one of those boards and commissions, find out who the current members are, when they meet, all of those different things. And on that initial landing page, there is an application link as well. And then one that we did not talk about was the state of Iowa. I've served on a board that is governor appointed for the state of Iowa. And so if you go to, if you just search state of Iowa boards and commissions, you'll be taken to this talent bank website, which I was actually new from when I applied. But then you click on visit state boards and commissions, and it takes you to Iowa boards and commissions. And so you click on those. And the one, I'm just going to show you the one that I served on because it's easiest for me. If it'll go there. Am I missing it? I'm not there yet. Sorry. More clicking. So anybody, I swear I just had this. It was the Iowa Council on Homelessness. This is what happens with technology. Here we go. There it is. So if you find a board that you're interested in, you can click apply to this board. It'll tell you who all the board members are, how many openings there are, when the regular meetings are, all of those different components. So there's a ton of state ones. You can also just search under current openings. So if you have interest at the state level, there's some really interesting opportunities to get involved as well. So I just wanted to share, again, because I'm a pretty visual person, where those opportunities were and what you could do. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Joni, thank you so much for sharing that and clicking through it. It definitely helps to see it. Does anybody have any questions for any of our presenters?
I got some.
Sarah, I wanted to add one. Oh, go ahead, Justin.
Well, go ahead. You go first, and then I'll go.
Regarding what Joni showed with the Iowa Talent Bank, you do need to keep in mind those are good opportunities, but a lot of those are Senate appointments and there's times and deadlines. So if you're ever thinking or interested in looking at something like that, make sure you reach out to whether it's us or whether it's someone else, one of your local legislators, someone that can put you in contact with the governor's office to make sure that you're really planning for that and getting that application, in when it needs to be done, because there are certain time frames and periods that those need to be done. So Joni, I thank you for bringing that up, but I just wanted to note that those are there is a process behind that.
Yeah, and I just add to what Drew said. On occasion, the government will, I guess I'll call it command direct you to be on some of these boards, and that has happened to me with the Flood Mitigation Finance Committee. Got a phone call one day from her office that said, "Oh, by the way, you're on this commission and you will be meeting on these times," and figure it out. So, and obviously it wasn't a big deal because we had a flood going on and we needed to be involved anyway. But one of the things I have two things I want to bring up. First is the ex officio thing. So a lot of times when you get elected officials involved, we are on boards and on these boards and commissions as ex officio members, or we're just kind of there to kind of help coach or whatever. I will caution you that make sure that you keep your elected officials in check, because a lot of times we are the good idea fairies and we think we know what's best and we will hijack your meetings. And so do your best to kind of, and it happened in the chamber board a few years ago. And I'm telling you, it was almost to the point where it became the ex officios meeting and not the actual commission members that were on there. So just make sure they know their role and when they're allowed to speak and when they're not. And sometimes you can just limit them to, handful of comments and that's it, but just use your discretion there. The other thing I want to bring up is, what I call the military, we call operational security. Serving on some of these boards and commissions, you're going to be privy to information that the average person in public may or may not be aware of. And it's not that they can't know, sometimes there's transparency issues there. But one thing, I'll give you an example. There's a piece of property that the county had interest in. We wanted to buy it, but we wanted to partner with the Iowa West Foundation on it in order to make this purchase. And I won't go into too much detail because now we're still negotiating with it, but the Iowa West Foundation had a meeting and basically said what they were willing to commit to it. Somehow between whether it was board or their board, it leaked out to the property owner that Iowa West was involved, and immediately the price of that property doubled. And now the project is over and now it's not likely going to happen. So I'd urge you that if you're going to get on these things, that realize that you have a responsibility and a duty to keep information, close to the vest, and don't share that with people you're not supposed to be sharing it with. And a lot of times they'll have you sign a non-disclosure agreement or something of that nature, but which kind of ties back into some of the questions earlier about, liability and things like that. You are entrusted with information that needs to be sometimes kept a little bit secret, and it eventually will make it to the public in due time. But just be aware of that. And I can tell you a ton of war stories, but one of the biggest challenges that we do have especially with Potawatomi County boards and commissions, is diversity. We want it, but the reality is that our county, we are predominantly one race. Our age-wise, a lot of the folks that are younger, for example, generally have jobs and they're not able to serve on these commissions. Look at our county board, for example. I'm 37. The next closest person to me is 63 years old. So there's generational gaps that appear there too. And now we're all male on the county board. So, I mean, it just, those kind of things happen. And you do your best to incorporate diversity when you can. But a lot of times you get in situations where you don't have the folks applying for these boards and commissions, and you may end up just putting the same person back on over and over again. And the example for that for us is the magistrate board that we have for the county. And no one wants to do that job. And Ron T-Kip, miraculously volunteered again. So we just put him right back on there again. So, I mean, that kind of stuff will happen. But, we really urge people, and especially young people, to get involved. And I'll tell you this, I was on Impact CB for a lot of years, and, use that, the networking that happens there, get involved in these boards. I mean, the future of our city, the future of our county, our state, it really is resting on a lot of our shoulders, especially in the professional world. So I urge every one of you to take a look at those boards, commissions out there, and, see when the time's right for you and try to get on one, because we really need your help with a lot of these things. And, like I said, you really are the future. So I'll leave it there for any questions.
Thanks, Justin. Do we have any other questions for our speakers who are here today? Drew, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what Justin said, and really about using it as an opportunity, especially if you've ever thought of looking at running for elected office, whether that be school board, whether that be city council, whether that be county board, whether that be state legislature, whatever it may be. The boards and commissions, I just can't emphasize that enough, are really a good place to get started and learn a lot as to what that may look like. But I also wanted to do a little shameless plug as well, as the fact that we will be formally announcing here soon that we are going to be doing a candidate academy as well. That's going to be in late June through early August. There's going to be 4 different sessions with different topics. Watch your information on that, especially if you do have any interest in looking ahead at running for office or learning a little bit more about what that takes. So I thought I would take the opportunity to let you all know that too. And thank you very much for your time, Joni and Justin. I think we lost the other two, but we thank you for your insight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drew. That's going to be a great opportunity for young professionals as well. Just in closing, I want to thank our sponsors again, Iowa Western. Thank you for making events like this possible. I do want to remind everybody that we recorded the session today. So in the next couple days, it will be up on the Chamber's YouTube channel. If you miss anything, want to revisit Rosie's slides or anything like that, or share it with somebody who wasn't able to join us today. Our next Impact CB membership event, is 2 weeks from today on May 27th. We are playing human foosball. So if you've ever looked at a foosball table and just thought, man, I wish that were me, this is the event for you. It's going to be really fun. We're going to have free food, free drinks, lots of giveaways, gift cards, tablets, things like that. So check that out on the Chamber website. Sign up. If you sign up, you will be guaranteed a free t-shirt and koozie. So we're going to be having a lot of fun at that. Hope to see you guys there. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.